Hello, Newberg Area Historical Society. We're excited to come to you virtually today. I'm excited to present Chuck Zickefoose, who's going to be presenting the history of the Red Electric Railroad here in Newberg. So Chuck, I'm excited to have you today. Go ahead and get started.
Okay. Well, I don't think there's probably anyone living now, at least I haven't met them, that was around when the Red Electric came through Newberg. It was an electric railroad or train that originated in Portland and went eventually all the way to Eugene. At one time, there were 60 trains running on the system and about 46,000 miles of track. They were called the Red Electric for obvious reasons, as you'll see. They were the only railroad that we know of that had this particular model, and it was run by several different ones, but near the end, Southern Pacific. It's interesting to note that very early in the history of Newberg, the first ordinance number 82 and June 24, 1892, they actually anticipated electric power running a railroad. They gave them the right to place them on all the streets, and they could be operated, it says, by horse, by steam, or electric power. Interesting enough, Jesse Edwards and John Wetherell controlled the electric company at the time also. This is the picture of the train downtown Newberg. And I think it's interesting to note the various modes of transportation that are shown in this picture. You have pedestrians, and you have horse and buggy, and you have the train. A little bit later, I'll be talking about modes of operation that were used to go back and forth to Portland and other points. So the only thing that's missing in this is a steamboat. The city ordinances 272 on January 13th granted the Oregon and California Railroad Company a 25-year franchise to run down Meridian to Hancock and First Streets for passenger service. Now, the interesting thing here is that the next ordinance granted Oregon Electric Railway Company rights to operate an electric railroad for passengers on the streets of Newberg. And they named 2nd Street, 1st Street, and Dayton Avenue from the intersection with 1st to the southwesterly extremity. And the mystery is why Dayton Avenue was in there. Also, the fact that 2nd Street never had the railroad as far as we know. The eventual route was from the intersection of Meridian Street and the railroad at the north extremity or northern part of Meridian Street, down Meridian, turning at 1st Street, and then going over to connect with the rail line again at the intersection of 1st Street and the railroad. The first run was January 5 and Beaverton to Gaston, and the regular service to Newberg was January 17, 1914. In 1915, Southern Pacific dropped the term PE&E and replaced it with Southern Pacific Lines. So Southern Pacific goes back a long ways. The Oregon Interurban Railway was known as red electrics that we are talking about, obviously because of the color of the cars. The actual route of the red electric was to go what they call the northern route and the southern route. The northern was through Forest Grove, the southern through Newberg and Dundee, and then they joined up again at St. Joseph. So this is a picture of the rail of the red electric heading for Newberg. The system map shown here shows how extensively they had the trains at that time. As I said, there were 60 at one time 60 trains running and 46,000 miles of rail went from Portland to Eugene. At one time, there were two tracks on First Street. One track was for the Oregon Electric, and the other for Southern Pacific. It's not known. It appears that there's only one set of electric line, so I believe that the Southern Pacific must have been a steam engine. So the route, I did a kind of a walkthrough of what the route looks like today. And we start at Meridian, go down past Franklin, past George Fox University into Sheridan, turns right on First Street, and then past Edwards and Electric Office. And on Blaine, it had to cross the Brick and Mill Railroad and finally connected with Southern Pacific at the next and to the next stop in Dundee. So looking east and south, these the intersection of where Meridian meets the railroad today. And went further down Meridian, past Franklin and Sheridan Streets, past George Fox University, and finally turning at the computer store, which is in the old bank building, and across the street is Steve's Auto, and then on down to the west to meet up again with the railroad, passed over Edwards, and then the rail office was over in this area, so it would have made a stop there to pick up passengers and then continue on either to Dundee or going back to Portland. And this is where the intersection would have been for connecting up with the existing main line. So, as I mentioned, there were various modes of operation in Newberg over the years. It runs from horses to cars. In the early 1900s, we had the horse and buggy, the main way of transportation. Also, people rode their horses. So horse was the major motive force for the transportation. Next came the steamboats, and the steamboat came up to from Portland, the locks. They put in locks at Oregon City, and then on up to Willamette, eventually through Yamhill, Locks Park, which the park still exists, and there was a set of locks at that point, just near Lafayette, the town of Lafayette, and then it went on up as far as McQuinnville, St. Joseph's at least. Then the red electric came along, and each of these modes of transportation essentially displaced the previous one. So horse and buggy, steamboats displaced the need for them. The next came the red electric, which did away with the horse and buggy, and finally cars. So each mode replaced the previous one as the major source of transportation. The Newberg paper shows progressively what was happening, the beginning of the end. The ridership, because of the cars that were being produced, dropped. The need for the railroad, and the car ownership in Oregon was twice the national average, increasing the pressure on the railroads. So they cut the fares initially, $1.15 to Portland. And then gradually, silver grays, a motor coach, replaced a portion of the red electrics. So it said that the silver grays, Southern Pacific Deluxe motor coaches made 4 trips a day from Corvallis to Portland. So that was more of the beginning of the end. And then finally, red electrics were gone from downtown Newberg in 1929. October 1929 saw the last red electric go through town. And so now they're advertising trains to San Francisco, and you'd have to go down to the depot on Main Street to catch the train. And then Ordinance 516 in 1921 repealed the franchise to the Oregon Electric Railway, and they had to forfeit all of the rails and ties. And then another ordinance released Southern Pacific from the franchise rights, and they were agreed to, in the initial agreement, they were supposed to remove, if they went out of business, remove the rails, ties, blocks, and other supporting material. And what they agreed on was to have them remove them on Meridian Street and then leave them in place on First Street. And Southern Pacific would pay $5,767.38 in lieu of removing the tracks and ties from First Street. So that the money that they received, the $5,700, was used to pave Meridian Street and First Street, and to pave over the tracks on First Street. I've searched for construction pictures that showed any of the old rail being moved, lifted up, and could only find one. This was work on First Street for a storm sewer in 1990s, and they found a piece of rail, probably more than a piece of rail, but this is what they found in the in digging up the train tracks. So that's the end, and this was the tail end of the red electric. So that's it.
Well, thank you, Chuck, for sharing with us today. We're excited to continue bringing history to you all during this time of quarantine, reminding you all that even though we are apart and we can't gather together, we can still learn and we can still join together in our appreciation of history. Take care.